It is like saying, why am I singing an alapana in Carnatic music? Right? Right? It's a similar kind of analogy. Sing an alapana. Or, for example, when you were there yesterday, last week at Nandagopal's thing. Okay. There was this huge canvas, I don't know whose it was, I don't remember now, with a dark maroon on this way, that came down. So was there a story? Was there an experience? Yeah. So if you could have an experience with just lines that came in a certain color and shade, I guess the same thing could happen through spatial movement and positions and pause. See, the whole thing about movement is the pause. If there's no pause, you will never recognize movement. If there's no movement, you will never recognize pause. And that's what this basically does. So they just play with pause, movement. Pause. Actually a pause. Actually a pause. Only when there's a pause do you know there's a movement. If life was always a movement, you don't recognize movement. So they use pause, movement, direction, and space to create a certain experience. I don't want to define it in certain words. Whereas Natya is very clear. If I'm going to, for example, for example, Bharatanatyam of today, if I'm telling a story of a lover waiting for his beloved, okay, I embody that character of the lover. The idea is you, in a way, experience the character and the pining for the lover, and all the attached stories that go with it, and therefore, in a way, I become the character. Right? That's Natya. Then you have something in between. I mean, I'm calling it in between. They didn't call it. I'm just saying in between for Nritya. So, this debate about Natya and Nritya, whether Nritta has this kind of experience, all this keeps going back and forth. Now, Nritya is interesting. They say that in Nritya, what they say is that there is an emotional experience. So, you could have lyrics, but there is no embodiment of the character, is what they say. For example, through Nritya, you could express, for example, experiences of nature. You are not necessarily taking the character of the person and enacting it as a role. So, in some way, it is, kind of has parts of Nritya in it, parts of Natya in it. It's a kind of an in-between kind of a possibility, a representational possibility of the emotive experience. This is my paraphrasing, by the way. I am not quoting from any treatise. I am using just normal language to try and bring this to a certain communication. Now, what could be an example of this? I mean, suppose I was describing, suppose it could be so many things, right? It could be a descriptive passage which talks about, say, the flowers. Okay? There is no character. I'm not the flower. I don't characterize the flower. But through the movement, the experience of the flower can be communicated, right? So that way, it's an emotional experience. There is an emotional, let's put this, there's a literal connection with an emotional possibility of life, of you viewing the flower, of you experiencing the flower. That is communicated through gestural movements and through possibility. I am not saying I am the woman who's dreaming of her lover and looking at the flower. Now, that changes the whole situation. It creates a context, it creates a situation, it creates a character. I am more interested in I am more the lover there than bother about the flower. So, the flower becomes, in fact, a passageway to understand the lover. So, there it kind of becomes a little more different. Rather than being representational, that becomes almost embodying character itself, which is what theatre does. Natya is actually theatre. In the context of Bharata, Natya is theatre, because in Bharata's sense, he uses words too. In those times, they had dialogues. People said dialogues. It was not just about today when we say dance, Bharatanatyam, we think of only non-dialogue. But in the Natya that they talk about, there's dialogues. So there's dialogues, there's movement, there is music, there is rhythm. All this together is coming in, providing that combined experience. See, this whole idea of theatre being separate from dance is to a large extent not been there in our cultural history, to a large extent. So it takes some time to imagine that Natya itself means a theatrical possibility and not literally a dance possibility. So you have all these things. But then, of course, I think there is some overlapping where there is a point where even, if I'm not mistaken, Bharata himself concedes somewhere that in one form of nritta, Shringara is felt or something. He gives a little opening. And once that is said, then the possibility is saying, okay, maybe even in abstractive movement that there is an emotive quality which is not possible. So there is this, I personally feel these are not like so like watertight. I think the beauty is probably spillovers that will always happen. And I'm talking about from the point of the art's intention, not on the point of what you will take, because that I can never place any situation on. You could take anything. So I think there were certain, and these discussions continue, whether there is something, there are, in Bharatanatyam now there's something called pure nritta pieces. But can you say that there is, it lacks some element of the Natya aspect? Now we can go back and forth on this a bit. It depends on what level you want to discuss it. So you have this whole idea of nritta, natya, nritya, all this happening. The most important aspect, I'm going to take the technical terms out of it before I actually get there. I think for Indian aesthetics is the word rasa. And I think this rasa theory has been discussed probably 2000 years here by scholars in this country, by artists and people who have come into scholars from other parts of the world. So can we just throw it open to ideas on what rasa is? Actually, we have discussed it in one of my lectures. I never used that word, but I'm very, very allergic to using technical words because I feel somewhere I get trapped with what I already think it means. So try staying away. But rasa, that's a word I'm sure many people would have come across at some point. What is this rasa? Okay, can you elaborate? Can I have some water? Some water. Just use that. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Forget about what they say. Tell me what you're saying. Because what they say is, let's keep it aside. Because if rasa is something that is experiential, we all should have some window to it. Let's use our own window. But I want, you used another word in your first, you said essence. So if you can just explore essence, it'll be interesting. The only way concentrate shot I know is like a vodka shot. Sorry that I couldn't resist that one, but go ahead. A concentrated shot, no. I think the word essence means something more. Essence is not a concentration. The essence is a kind of distilling. When you say something is an essence of something, it's not a concentration of something, it's a distilling of something. My curiosity is, what do you mean by that? You used a word which is a very interesting word. But when you say that rasa is a distilling of emotion, which I think is a very, very lovely way to look at it actually. What do you really mean? I mean, somebody can disagree with her, by the way, please.
Are these like senses of taste, sweet, sour?
No, I'm going to say no. I mean, that's very normal. Like, you love something, you hate something, you get angry.
So the rasas, are they just...
Yeah, you can categorize them. The categories will come too. That's okay. But there is an overall aspect, an aesthetic aspect that is being communicated through into these categories, right? So there's something slightly deeper, I think, in the whole discourse, which you later can break.
Emotional feeling?
Yeah, but no, there's more qualification that happens in rasa. So anybody else, any takers? Yes, rasa is an experience. Rasa is aspect of the emotion, but I like the word essence very much. But it is a kind of distilling. A distilling possibility. So the question is, first, can you distill emotion? Sounds like a very nice philosophical statement to make, but what does it mean by distilling emotion? One. Okay, can I throw a possibility to it? I'll come to the actual rasa later, but let's just explore this possibility. Sorry? Theme. No, I'm not sure. Theme is the context that would evoke the possibility of rasa. A situationality is the theme, right? I need you to speak a little louder. I have a very loud voice. Can you answer that question yourself? You don't think they can be discrete? Okay, what do you mean by emotions being discrete?
Can I classify emotions as being this or that and this not? Can I have an emotion that is just itself and not a mix of anything else?
You can't? I'm asking you. I don't know. I'm not passing judgment on it. Can you?
Because if I can't do that,
No, can you do that? Can you have at least for a split, is it possible for a split second?
I could do that, then there would be no difference between happiness and joy.
So you can do that is what you're saying. Only if you can do that, there is a difference between joy and happiness, no? If you can't do it, there's no difference, right? So you're saying it's possible actually. You are. You're not sure, but you agree that when you feel joy, it's different. When you feel happiness, it's different. That you can see. We don't need to articulate it in what is joy, what is happiness. I mean, I don't think we do, but we know there's certain things you just feel that there's a difference between, shall we say, sadness and disappointment. There's a difference. We may not exactly be able to tell you because you may have to create a context to tell when you felt sadness or something. So it is possible that these nuances are felt at least, shall we say, for a fleeting time. May not be consistently because other things may quickly come in and change context. Or you yourself your emotive layers may evolve during the process. All that, but it's possible that these little things, I mean, it's beautiful that any language creates different words like this. Because I think that itself tells you that there is a certain exploration happening on experience when language tries to create these different words. Your Google will show it all as synonyms, but you can't use them as synonyms. You know that. You will not use it as synonyms. So I think distilling, now if I was going to interpret distilling, let's look at a different context. You go and watch a terrible film, a sad film, okay? See, it's really, say Schindler's List, okay? It's a movie that moves you tremendously. I mean, that scene of that girl, I think in a pink dress, is that it? I don't remember now. It was a pink dress? White, is it? Red dress, yes. That whole shot of that that red dress, everybody remembers, so people watched. It's a very, very disturbing film. But Schindler's List, it was a movie on the Nazi period, and it's about this Jew who made a lot of people escape. But you come out of the film with a sense of pleasure, right? You feel very sad, but you say it's a brilliant film. And there is a certain pleasure that is derived from that experience, which is why you will see it is why you will see it 4 times if you will see it. It's a sad film, disturbing film, it's a horrific film, it's all that. But there is a certain, I'm using the word pleasure because of a lack of a different word immediately in my head. But there's a certain deep gratification that has happened in that experience, which we have to think about. The same thing happens in a play. The same thing happens when a character, when for example a character, even if it's happy, I used sadness as a classic case because the contrast is very easy to identify. But it happens with everything else. Even the movies of victory, movies of love, movies of anything. In all that happens in the cinema or on the stage, irrespective of the shade of emotion that is happening, you are experiencing it because in the process of the experience, there is a deep sense of fulfillment that is happening. So, emotion is being felt, yes.
In fact, some of the most powerful lines in Shakespeare, from which one draws enjoyment or whatever you want to say.
Yeah, there is no word for it.
Very tragic.
Absolutely.
Tragic
it's true of poetry too, absolutely. True of poetry too. That even the most tragic lines, and you go, with those lines, I mean, at one level I was thinking, how can I do that to that line? But you do that. So can we say that there is a certain distancing of the self, of yourself, and that emotion, yet the emotion is being experienced in a different way? You experience everything that that child experienced on stage, or what Shakespeare explains. But in a way, you're able to, you stay away and you're part of it. Which is why you're able to go back home with a sense of, aha, right? Even in, you've retained that aha in yourself. So there's the distilling, if I want to use that word, is a kind of removal of the personal. The point here is that we attach emotional experience always with the personal. This is very similar to what I had kind of discussed, similar to what we had discussed in the context of abstraction in music, where it is possible to have an emotional experience which is dispassionate, which does not involve the self. In some way, or at least actually in a very obvious way, the rasa theory in a way looks at that possibility. The possibility that it is possible to have that the function of theatre, okay, is to create context, actual actions, actual poetry, music and dance that enables for this experience of rasa. Rasa as being the essence, rasa as being the nuanced feeling of human emotion from which you could actually experience a certain fulfillment, yet connect with deeply with an emotional possibility. So in fact, I will try and use some of the technical words I want. So they talk about first a context that has to create. So how does this rasa happen, okay, without using the technical terms? Yeah. Your person. Yeah, which is why I completely, it's possible that the performance was bad too, right? Okay, so for which what the theory says is, there's a word called the sahridaya, that the person who is experiencing it, or the participant, is a person who is deeply involved in the process of that art making. Okay, so you're not a casual person who is saying, I'm free for 2 hours, can I go watch a film? Okay, even if you go there, but that you're committed to that whole thing. And what they say is, if the commitment is there from, say, the viewer, and the commitment to create this experience is there from the production, from the people, then the possibility of rasa automatically emanates. That's what I'm saying. That in fact, that's the most classic cases. In fact, the classic cases are those when you watch something very disturbing, but you want to watch it again. In a way, it's crazy. If that happened to you, you would never want to do it again, right? To put it very simply. But it's, and it's not voyeuristic. This is not voyeurism of sorts, that you're deriving pleasure of seeing somebody being tortured. No. That's not what's happening. That's very different. This is a certain engagement that is happening in that, and that's what rasa says is an aesthetic experience. So what they say is you have to create a context. So the context could be the story. So the story, if you take the story of Shakuntala, for example, it's a classic case to explain rasa theory. Everybody would use Shakuntala for it because it has so many movements in it. Then if you take in that story the context of, say, the ring being lost in the boat and the ring has fallen to the water, okay? So that's the context. Now in the context, what happens? The actor, then there is voluntary reactions coming from the actor as soon as that cause has happened, okay? All this is part of the experience. Then there is involuntary reactions that could happen from the actor, that is fear, could be sweating, could be so many other things. So all this, and then in between there are what you could call transient emotions that will come and go. The overall emotion and that context, there is one sustained feeling of saying, oh my God, that thing is gone. But in between that, you could have a conversation with the boat person who's saying something. How could you lose that ring? I mean, I'm just now completely thinking on the fly. Okay, that didn't happen in Shakuntala, okay? But how could you lose the ring? Now that's That's a conversation that's happened. So there's a different kind of an emotion that is coming, but that's going to go away. That's the transient emotion, okay? So you have these things happening, actions happening, voluntary actions happening, involuntary actions happening. You have people in costume, you have facial expressions, and you have the larger context. So you have one sustained feeling of loss. That is the known as the overriding sustained emotional quality. If that quality is sustained, enabled by all the actions that are happening around it, then it leads to an aesthetic experience called rasa. If that sustained emotion is not held, then rasa cannot happen. This is how, very in colloquial terms, how rasa theory is explained. Of course, by the way, there are no 9 rasas. I want to tell you, there are only 8 rasas. According to Bharata, there are only 8. And the 8 are, I'm very bad at all these names. Hasya, Karuna, Veera, Bhayankara, Bhibhatsa, Adbhuta, all these are the rasas. The Shanta rasa is an addition that came later. It was not part of the rasas. There were only 8 rasas according to Bharata, and the 9th has been later added. I don't want to go into how, why, and the socio-political and the aesthetic reasons why that could have happened, but that's what has happened. See, the thing is, what you must remember, there's another interesting word that they use here. Some of these words are interesting. I didn't use Satvika Bhava, Sanchari Bhava, Vichari Bhava, Sthai Bhava, all these words I did not use because they're very confusing. But I think in normal conversation it was far more easier for me to talk about it. Of course, there are many categories of these emotions. So, Bhava is the emotion. So I want to tell you that there are multiple categories of transient emotions that can come in, multiple categories of voluntary actions that can come in, involuntary actions that can come in. So all this, in a way, complicated layerings that happen in a context, which are all in a way holding a sustained emotion, lead the Sahridaya to an aesthetic experience, for which everybody, suppose at some point of time, enters the state of being the sadharani karana. That is, you in a way enter the state of the aesthetic happening. You enter the character state. You enter the possibility of the context, of the loss, of everything. So only a person who is aesthetically, shall we say, committed can go through this. This is exactly very similar to going to a museum and looking at a canvas. If you don't commit there to the canvas, we finish an art museum in 30 minutes. We walk through it like we're walking through corridors and then we walk back out, right? But then when you aesthetically commit, then you spend time. This happened to me recently. I forget the name of the painter. I'm very bad with names. It was in Manila, in Manila recently. And there is this, at the museum, at the National Museum, there's this huge canvas by this Filipino painter who became a national symbol because he, of course, went to Spain and he was a painter in Spain. This is a huge canvas. And I can tell you, we couldn't move from there. We just couldn't move. Myself and my wife Sangeeta were there and we just couldn't move. It was as if we were, after a point, that whole painting had kind of enveloped us and we were actually going through. There were shades of grey and black through which you could walk. And you could see in shadows walls. And you do realize that this is also me imagining me there, right? You may look at the painting and say, what is this man talking about? But that's the whole idea. We had aesthetically committed to that possibility. So that's the whole thing about the rasa theory. There is a commitment to this possibility from everybody, from the production, from the costume designer, to everybody, from the dialogues, everything. If one thing doesn't fall into place, then what you said does not happen. The whole experience goes away. See, this is, some people like to compare this to the Greek theatre. There are certain nuances to which you can find differences. The whole idea of catharsis, for example. Cathartic experience of something being some kind of a healing experience can be looked at. But there are differences in it. If you can go into scholarly debates on how it's very different. But I think there are also similarities that need to be acknowledged between what the Greek were also talking about, but there is also differences. So this whole rasa is the basis on which we have built this whole idea of Indian classical dance. The theorization of rasa has been carried forward through years and years and years, and it still holds good in terms of how dance is theorized. Okay? An important aspect, of course, is the fact that dialogue does not exist today in Bharatanatyam. Dialogue is not part of the presentation. It's taken as only being a dance form. So when we say natya now, we mean nritta, the abhinaya, without the aspect of dialogues. Here we must also remember that a lot has also been taken. I'm going to go through it with more detail, but I will just say a few points. A lot has also been taken from the sculptures that have been seen in the temples. A lot has been taken from trying to understand them and through that movement. And it is through that that we have today the modern creation of Bharatanatyam is again a modern happening. It is about 100 years old, with its contents being not more than 170 years old. Its contents. But like most things in India, we would rather say it's old than say it's new. Because somehow we are... Bharatanatyam is in its today's form hardly 100 years old. The word itself is a modern creation. Its contents, if you take it, maybe 170 years old, about it.
By contents, what do you mean?
I'll come, the form of how it's presented, the compositional forms that are presented, etc. That's what I mean by contents. Okay.
So it's a 100-year-old remake of something that was older.
Absolutely. It is. Now, I'll take Odyssey for example. Odyssey is 50 years old. Odyssey was redone in the 1950s. It didn't have a form. So there were few Devadasis living in Bhuvane, near Jagannath Puri, who used to dance this. It's taken from them. In fact, Odyssey had a lot of Carnatic music in it. In fact, Odyssey music now, even now, is not Hindustani or Carnatic. It is somewhere in between. They use ragas which are South Indian ragas like Shankarabharanam. They sing it like they're a different Shankarabharanam, but they still say Shankarabharanam. So in fact, a cleansing process was done where most Carnatic elements were kind of removed from it. Okay? To make it sound more Hindustani-ish. So it's hardly 50 years old. I mean, so if you really look at old dance forms, you will have to look to Kudiyattam, you will have to go to Yakshagana, you will have to go to